All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Seema Kacharian. Right before we begin, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. As a campus that really values diversity and educating its students in a variety of ways, we really want to encourage and invite everybody here to contemplate the people who existed on this land before us and who continue to exist on this land. I want to humble us today by acknowledging that the land we are standing on was originally inhabited by the Kalapuya people, specifically the Tualatin Band, which belonged to the Grand Ronde and Warm Springs Confederation, as well as the many other tribes who made their home along what is now known as the Columbia River. I want to thank those descendants for being the original stewards and protectors of these lands since time immemorial. They are the people who not only walked this land before us and stewarded the land, but created it to be what it is today, to what we know it to be. And we owe it to those people and to ourselves and this land to take a moment to acknowledge the problems of suffering, genocide, colonialist policy, and more. And so I really want to give a moment at the beginning of this talk for people to reflect on what their relationship is to the land. What is your positionality, and how do you benefit from settler colonialism, which permeates so much of modern life, and the people who existed here before us and who continue to exist, but who stewarded the land before we came to be here. And so this is something that I think really ties into what we're going to talk about today, because we were sure to include Native voices as well in our project, which you will hear about soon. And so I want to emphasize how honored we are by the collective work of many Native nations, leaders, and families, and the resilience and resistance, healing, and creativity that they demonstrate. And so we are honored to be guests upon these lands. So I'm going to give a little bit of a longer introduction. My name is Seema Kacharian. I'm a current senior at Pacific University studying anthropology and applied sustainability. And I'm here with Carson, who I will soon turn over to introduce our project, to talk about this social justice mural, as it was dubbed throughout the process, that we started and are hoping to finish soon in Forest Glen Park here in Forest Grove. So Carson?
Yes, my name is Carson Buck, and Seema, thank you for that beautiful introduction. I just want to take a moment to thank you, brothers and sisters on this land, and thank you, Seema, for being here with me today. Thank you, Earth, thank you, Air, thank you, Space, thank you, Water, thank you, Fire. I'm so blessed to be alive in this times, and I'm just really excited for today. I am a soon-to-be graduate at Pacific University, applied sustainability major, philosophy minor, and Spanish minor. So Seema and I have been living with each other for the past couple of years, and during this summer, it was kind of June and a pretty indescribable feeling, as I'm sure most people kind of felt, that we needed to go to the park and kind of just like release energy. So we went to Forest Glen Park to actually roll down this hill here to the left. Kind of childish, but definitely needed. And once we got down this hill, we saw this American flag. Looks pretty trashy and dirty and scrumpy, pretty outdated. Actually, it kind of represents America, I'm not gonna lie. At least in this current age. So we felt like it wasn't representational and it needed a makeover because it wasn't relating to most of the people who maybe pass it or think about America. And anything else you want to add to that little baby story, Simo?
Yeah, I think that, after rolling down that hill and arriving at the American flag, and this was right around the height of the BLM protests, or not the height of it, but the start of them, especially in Portland, we were thinking, does this flag really represent the community? Does it make everybody feel welcome? And it was, as Carson said, not in great condition. Like had paint splotches and, was chipping away. And we really felt that the condition was also maybe like representative of how like America was doing as a society, because we were not working together. And so we thought, what other images would be more appropriate there in bringing the community together and making people feel welcome? Because at that time, in all honesty, Carson and I were like, this symbol, the American flag, does not make us feel welcome because of what it represents to a lot of people and what's happening in our country.
And I think to get off
That's
on that is something, it wasn't just like us. It was more like, okay, we kind of stood there and was like, the American flag doesn't represent most of the voices within our country. And with that said, Seema can't explain how maybe that flag makes another individual of a different community feel. And our goal was to create something that everybody could feel connected to and a part of, where an underrepresented voice was becoming represented.
right. And it was really important to us to do that, to represent other voices and celebrate diversity in a different way. And that's not to mean any disrespect to the flag. Like, that celebrates diversity to others, but everybody has a personal story and connection to that flag. And so for us, it was really important to think about the broader sentiments behind the flag and how, especially like how it's being used lately, who is using the flag and in what context, I think changes how people see it and what feelings it produces in people. And so it wasn't meant out of like a hatred for the flag, but just like an understanding of like these like sentiments behind the usage of the flag lately, especially in like Forest Grove, where you see that flag a lot associated with certain like political perspectives. Not that that's negative, but it starts to carry that sentiment. And so we thought, is there something that can more strongly and purposefully celebrate diversity? And so that's really what started this for us.
Exactly. So Seema and I kind of took that idea, and at first we were like, well, maybe we should just graffiti our original ideas, and we'll get to our original ideas and describe them in the future. A conversation with our roommate, and we're like, okay, well, what are we going to do? We're living in a historical time where to go outside is dangerous amongst many different levels, because we're living in a pandemic. So this picture or email that you see on the screen is Seema taking one of our first steps into the direction after we kind of had the grateful support of some other community members, especially some professors who we really much look up to. So this is Seema emailing Tom, what's his last name?
Gamble. Yeah, I think this was the first email I sent. It was the night that we had the idea. We were actually driving to a hike the following day, or maybe that day. No, I think it was the following day. And I was in the car and I was like, oh, right, I'm going to look up, like, who do I contact? Who's the parks manager? Who's, is the mayor's email publicly available? Because that's the other thing. It wasn't really obvious, like, how to go about something like this. And so in addition to figuring out like the initial contact of emailing Tom, we began to have this conversation about what would this project even look like? How do you go about doing something like this officially? And here, you're kind of seeing like there were a lot of emails exchanged between Tom and I. He's the parks manager, where it wasn't very like clear. We were given a very like vague answers about what to do next, and just like being told that we should wait, and that it was going to be a very long process. That was something that was told to us a lot, which was hard for us to understand, that it's something as simple as painting a wall, but it's going to be a very long process. And so we had this challenge of working through that wall that was put up, the first wall of like, this is going to be like being given like vague answers. And so this next email that's like, paused on the screen right now, I emailed Carson and I drafted together this email and I sent it out to a lot of faculty, staff, students at Pacific University, community members who we'd worked for or with for the climate walkout that Karsten and I both organized. She organized the first one mostly because she's amazing. But we asked them for support. We said, can you email the mayor and the parks manager and say that this is something you want to see? So it's not just us two community members. It has more backing behind it. And the response was amazing. We got a lot of people who were so supportive. And actually there were people who were already having meetings even before they invited us about like how to support us for this mural project. And yet we eventually like came into them and it became a conversation amongst community members too. It wasn't just Pacific faculty and staff, but there were quite a few who were incredible in helping us figure out which direction to go.
Yeah, but it was cool to just have this community and have a knowing, like a sense of knowing that they're here because they want to help too. They're a part of this community and they want inclusion and growing together to be a goal too. Like they're doing this so that we can grow together. I don't know how else to explain that. However, just I'm very grateful that they could help us learn and give advice when we needed kind of a sense of direction, figuring out who to email or like who to contact. Prior to Seema emailing Tom, I emailed different counselors of the Forest Grove City Council, kind of migrating the path of realizing that within the Forest Grove City Council, because they are too living in a historical time period of a pandemic, transitioning everything to be online, that this was a new process for everybody. But this was a community engagement that like increased engagement within the Forest Grove community for sure because of reaching out, like this email shows on the screen.
Right, and I think, you know, it's important to include that we weren't just grappling with the how do I put this, like the logistical side of it, but also the like philosophical and like moral implications of this. You know, we had a lot of conversations with colleagues, friends, students about, you know, art as activism and, you know, like performative allyship versus like genuine change and like work that really has an impact on the community. And it was finding this balance of like not just figuring out the process and who do we reach out to and like how long is this going to take and how do we get XYZ done, but also really deeply thinking about what is being put in this mural and how it's being perceived by others and how we're going deeper than just putting something up on a wall. And so I think that that's really important to think about too, because it was such a big part of our conversation and because, you know, art as activism, I think is something that is not always talked about, that, you know, it really can spark conversation and important change in a city.
I agree. And when this idea of like art as activism, it's pretty interesting looking at the history and different aspects of American history when like there were in like the 1920s through 1940s, Mexican muralists came from Mexico, from the Mexican Renaissance to like Diego Rivera, David Alfaro Siqueiros, and some other Mexican revolutionaries who like engaged in art to reorient art history because they knew what the power of representation held within a community and how that speaks volumes to create change. And their goal was actually to go against imperialistic ideas. And sometimes you kind of have to go outside of a comfort level and maybe put up things that might kind of rub other communities funny so that they have this, oh, you know, why did that trigger me to feel that way? Kind of create this like sense of realization and open that perspective to hopefully positive change and uniting our powers together, because we all at the end of the day have an emotion And that's what I guess in this third dimension we're trying to deal with, is how do we control everybody's emotions? Because everybody has a different opinion at the end of the day. So I think
and we saw a lot of that. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good.
But we saw a lot of that. I think that brings up a really important point that, you know, some people were uncomfortable by the concepts that we were presenting, or just even the idea that the flag was going to be taken down. And so I think that really emphasizes to me, and maybe to Carson, that, you know, this, like, we find growth in discomfort. You know, when you get uncomfortable by something, you have to think about why. And so there were a lot of people who were really uncomfortable with the design of the mural, which, you know, we'll talk about what concepts it included soon, and people who were uncomfortable with the idea of the American flag being taken away. And, you know, our new design did include the American flag, but to some people this was a symbol of comfort and not having to think deeper about what is going on in our country today. And yeah, that's
so actually, you kind of bring me a good point. Why don't we make it a little more clear to our audience, kind of like the battles that we faced within this process of why we were halted to a degree to put paint on this wall to begin with. Because prior to paint being put onto this wall, it was an art in itself because of the communication or lack thereof within this community and the city council.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, that's a beautiful point. I think Charlotte Lumet, she's a community member.
Shout out.
Absolutely love them. They're just amazing. But they pointed out to us that you know, the process itself is a form of art, because when you have this process, you're able to kind of like work with people, change their perspectives, or have a conversation with them along the way. And that in itself is like this form of art and something really beautiful. And so, you know, even from the get-go, having to talk to different groups of people about what we wanted to put on this wall, or why the American flag needed to be replaced with something else, that in and of itself led to this growth in conversation. I think conversation is one of the biggest things that we can do in our own personal lives to combat, you know, injustices that we see. And it wasn't like there were arguments or aggressive conversations. And that's the great thing about this, was that because it's a process and it's slow and you have to talk to all these people, these conversations tended to be things where it was like we just wanted to empathize with people, understand where they were coming from, and have them understand where we were coming from. It wasn't like we wanted to convince them.
Well, I think I'm gonna actually stop you there, because some of the negative conversation we just didn't engage with or see it.
That's true.
So
that's very true.
Maybe to make it more clear, Seema's and I original idea when we saw the flag included the flag. We wanted it to be kind of like a memorial of people's voices in American history that had been underrepresented and then represented on this wall. But due to things changing and advice, that rendering of an idea evolved like us within this whole process. So we utilized our goals, which was to find a person of color artist within the metro community and pay them through a grant that we wrote. And so we wrote a grant to the Arts Commission of Forest Grove and applied to then receive $500 to pay this artist that we were in contact with through a bunch of other people. And we kind of were led to this person, which was kind of cool. His name is Jamali Arts. Shout out to him and his resilience in working with us and the Forest Grove community within this process.
And his patience.
And very, very, very much patience, because we are kind of continuously thrown implicit bias or unconscious racism was was clearly present.
And you know, to that point, because you're right, I totally forgot that, but the initial, so I initially drafted something that I was going to have an artist professionally render, but it was the whole thing was still the American flag with 3 different colored fists in the middle, and then names on the flag of either people who had lost their lives due to police injustice, or who were an incredible part of like social justice movements. And when Carson and I first talked about this, we talked about it as like a Black Lives Matter mural, but that scared a lot of people away using that like title and having it,
what should we call it, kind of like the word sustainability or recycle or green
buzzword. Yeah, it had a lot of connotations behind it. And so, you know, even if we hadn't said BLM, the three fists that were in the middle that were very clear odes to the movement made people initially very like uncomfortable. So we had to, like, part of the process of not just dealing with the bureaucratic system of the city council and Forest Grove, but also people, was that you kind of have to learn, and this is kind of hard to admit, but to compromise a little bit and to work around that, or to do things that people might be more comfortable with, because it's still creating change. Maybe it's not as radical as you want it to be, but, you know, one step in that direction is just some sort of step at all, at least, you know. And so I think that was one of the harder parts to grapple with for this project, to be honest.
Yeah, you really triggered me there for a second, because one thing that like absolutely pissed me off to ends was when we were sitting in a city council meeting watching it through my computer, and they couldn't pass our idea because we didn't have this image here on the screen to show them. Yet I had written, with the help of Seema, a rendering through words that is depicted of this image. Every detail that, you know, we thought of was written, but because it wasn't visually represented, the City Council of Forest Grove stalled us for another 4 weeks. And that really is frustrating, because Seema and I started this back in June, end of May, early June. And so it's already like the middle of our fall semester 2020. You know, we're seniors. Not that that like had any, not that that was gonna change our goals. It just like we didn't plan for this to, I guess we didn't take Tom's initial email as serious as, pardon me, as we should have, when he said this is going to be a very long process.
Right. And a part of it, what was so frustrating, I think, was that, you know, history had shown that for other people, this hadn't been as long of a process as it was for us. So, I mean, when we think about the American flag that was put up, which I believe was put up by the Boy Scouts troop in Forest Grove, they got permission and had that put up within a couple of months. And the fact that our initial proposal, it even took like months to even get it to city council and to have them have a meeting. And part of it was they weren't having meetings due to the pandemic. But it was frustrating that, you know, as our city council, there was no clear pathway. You know, when you look online, there's no like direct person to contact if you want to do something with the city. There's no process. It didn't feel like there was clear, obvious communication about when they were meeting, or like how to go about like issues or speak to the city council at all. So I'm sorry, that's a bit of a tangent.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna go off on that. Like if Seema and I had a meeting with 2 council members, doesn't necessarily mean they communicated what they learned with the rest of the city council. And like it's hard for Seema and I to have that knowing of like what certain people in the city council did know or didn't know. And that we faced that a lot, I think, during the meetings, where we would be there and be like, what, didn't we already talk about this like last week with somebody else?
Yeah, and that was one of that was one of the frustrating parts. So that lack of, you know, clarity was really evident whenever we would have meetings with people who weren't engaged in a previous meeting, because there was no clear form of communication between different groups of people. So we would talk with one person about the fact that, you know, we were planning on doing, and that one person would be like the head of, I think, communication city council. So I will say like the parks manager, about how we were planning on doing an anti-graffiti coding, because a lot of the reason why they were hesitant about putting this up was fear of backlash and having it become a further eyesore because of being graffitied. And that was never communicated to the city. Even when there was a meeting and that was brought up as a point, the people who knew that that was our plan didn't speak up. And so that's another frustrating thing, is like, you weren't allowed to speak up at the meetings. Like, you had time in the beginning, like a minute literally, to say something, and then you couldn't jump in if something was said that was contradictory or not true, and you wanted to be like, wait, like, we actually have a plan to address that. Like, we're having everybody sign you know, a liability contract. We are, you know, putting anti-graffiti coating. Our ladder is certified by, I forgot what's the name, but it's like a safe ladder. You know, there was no way for us to jump in and say that. So our voices were really limited. And yeah, it just, I don't know, it really speaks to me, like, the bureaucracy of the whole process, that you have to go through all these steps and these hoops, but you're not even allowed to, like, speak, or to, there's really no going around these, like, barriers or walls. Like, there was no way for us to be like, okay, why can't we do it this way? Why can't we do it this way? Because the system functioned in this certain way and they weren't changing it. And then the irony and honestly, like, really frustrating part of that was that other people had been able to do it other ways, but we weren't allowed that exception. And I think it was really about the content of our mural, and who was involved in the process versus in past processes. So when you think about that, like, who gets favors within the system and is able to move forward more quickly, I think it speaks volumes about the way that our system is set up.
Yeah. And I think that goes again with those, like, buzzwords. If it wasn't called social justice mural to begin with, I don't think it would have, like, wrapped so many panties in a wad, because for white communities to understand that their voice isn't the one that needs to be heard right now. I agree with you. It was clear that the city council lacked organization and communication skills, which triggered differing, I think, remarks within the community itself, because what I observed from various emails we received was that this mural really created a conversation within our community. I can't remember the exact amount of sent in emails, but I think it was the second city council meeting Seema and I went into in person, because that's one thing. You could only speak and have 2-minute remarks if you went in person to the city council meetings. Now, I digress. We're in a freaking pandemic. How is that accessible for all communities? If you need to have a representation or comment in your community, but you need to be there in person, what if you have Crohn's disease or Parkinson's or cancer, and going in person is going to risk your survival right now? And I guess that goes even further, that communities of color are already disproportionately marginalized within those systems because of suppression that has been created within the creation of certain neighborhoods existing in certain areas within our lands. So anyway, I know we continue to digress, but those do have prominent factors that relate to then having everybody equally be represented and voiced within a community. And I think that it's cool that we got so many people to email in their support for our mural, because that, I think, made a huge difference.
Yeah, and actually, I want to build off of what you just said, because I think that that is super integral to this entire experience. Was that, you know, accessibility was a huge thing that we talked about a lot, and also just the experience of what we faced. So I want to touch on those two things, but the accessibility that Carson mentioned, you know, like, communities of color, which we so badly wanted to represent and support through this mural and make them feel welcome. They don't have the same opportunities and privilege that Carson and I had to be able to go in person, because we don't have the same health risks that maybe other communities may have due to being disproportionately impacted, but also working longer hours or having different jobs, multiple jobs to make ends meet. You know, all these things that we see disproportionately impacting certain groups of people. You know, Carson and I had the privilege to work around those and have the time and energy to commit to a project like this, which really, to be quite honest, was a lot of time and energy. And so when you think about that, this kind of thing, this kind of community work is not accessible for all people to do. And that made it even more frustrating that we wanted, you know, you want other people to be able to do this kind of thing, but they don't have the time or the resources to do it. I mean, it was an incredible amount of time and resources. I mean, Carson and I even took money out of our own, you know, savings to do this stuff. I mean, of course we got reimbursed, but you know, some people don't have that money to take out in the first place. And so all these barriers were really obvious. And even just, you know, the lack of public information about how to go about these things, I think speaks to lack of accessibility. If you don't have the time and the energy to go through the process of figuring out how to do this, you're not going to do it. And I think that, you know, that barrier is a really important part of discussion, because I think that serves as a further suppression of dissent or activism in any form, because you're finding ways to make, maybe not purposefully, but it feels very purposefully,
Yeah.
to make things less accessible for certain communities. And so we were really privileged in being able to do this project. And that's why it was so important to us to have, you know, the ideas of this mural be from people of color and the artist be a person of color, so that we were just the facilitators, really. So hope, just so that's clear, you know, like all of these ideas, the concepts of farm workers, the fist, the LGBTQ plus flag, and the American flag, those,
Homelands.
yeah, the land acknowledgement, those were all things that we brainstormed together with people of color, specifically the Latinx community, and with the artist. And he is a Black artist from Portland, Oregon, and he has done other justice work, art like mural work. And so we reached out to him and said, you know, what is your interpretation of this? This matters. We also want you to have freedom, artistic freedom with this, because we value your voice and your style. And then it was hard for that to be even further suppressed when, you know, the city council wanted to nitpick and edit this design, which is the voice of a person of color. And we even got asked, this is a slight tangent,
No,
where white people's voices were. And, you know, like we were questioned, well, I can't remember the way it was exactly said, Carson, jump in if you want to, but it was a city council meeting. And we were talking about, what is the city's voice? Who is representing the city? Does this represent the city's voice, like locally represent other people's like voices? And somebody literally asks, like, you know, do white people have a say, or where's their voice represented? And you know, as two white passing females presenting this project and helping facilitate this, it was like just so frustrating to even be asked that. It was, I don't know, Carson, I don't know if you can articulate that better than I am, but it was just astonishing that someone even asked us, like, where are white people involved? Because white people haven't been oppressed.
Yeah.
For
The city council member A was trying to articulate that the white communities that are disabled were not being represented. However, when they had voiced this, it was right after two council members had explained their experience with their family members, going into detail how they have impacted or they have encountered racism and feeling alienated from the American flag due to their personal stories. And after I don't even know how to articulate this, but after those people explained that over the computer, that was an emotional experience for them to share with us that, you know, they didn't have to do. That woman spoke over them and didn't even acknowledge and just continued to say, you know, where is the white people being represented in this? So in the mix of all of it, it was really, they were unable to listen and I think grasp the understanding of what our goals were and what other feelings that had been felt, and just trying to appeal to a certain part of the community for maybe possibly.
So, you know, that was just some of the challenges that we faced.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it made it really clear to both Carson and I that bureaucracy, as much as it exists for a reason, can be a form of suppression of dissent. I mean, so I took a course, and part of why Jules Boykoff helped this was because we reached out to him for advice in the beginning, titled Suppression of Dissent. Excellent professor, recommend taking a course with him if you can, about how, you know, bureaucracy, or like limiting the way that people can protest or do activism, is a form of suppression. It is suppressing people's voices. And so the fact that we couldn't just freely do this, and we had to jump through all these hoops for literally 6 months till we even got approval to start painting, and other groups didn't have that same experience, kind of speaks to me about how bureaucracy can act as suppression. And, you know, before we move on, and I apologize that we're kind of like jumping around here, you know, I think about, for example, protests. So in order to protest, a lot of times you need to fill out like a form or talk to the police and tell them if you want to go about it formally or bureaucratically. And so that in and of itself is suppressing the dissent, that you are given the option or like told that you should fill out some kind of form or request or yeah, what is it? There's a name for it. I can't remember it right now, but that you're asked to basically like inform them, which defeats the purpose, in my opinion, of like resistance and a protest. And, you know, the same thing here. There were a lot of times, and to be completely honest and blunt, that Carson and I were like, well, maybe we just need to like literally go out there at night and put our ideas up there. Because yeah, because that is the radical message we wanted to send. We went about it the right way because we really didn't feel like being arrested or breaking any laws.
However, I
But
will say, Seema and I, on top of all these meetings we not only had with the City Council, the Arts Commission of Forest Grove, and outsider community members and professors, Seema and I were meeting on the daily, just talking about these ideas and like, oh shit, I just kind of forgot what I was gonna say based on what you just said.
So I mean, I'll just jump in, but we were meeting every single day talking about like not just what emails we wanted to send out, but like the moral implications of this work. Are we making sure that it's not performative? Are we really like doing any good by working with the system to do this work? Or working within a system that we see as flawed. So like fighting with all those moral implications and dilemmas about how we do this work. I mean, are we making sure that it is not merely performative and that it really has an impact? And we talked about that a lot, or even what we're showing in the image, you know, is the idea that we showed like farm workers and laborers, because that is a huge population of Forest Grove. Is that stereotyping the Latinx community? Even if it is accurately representative of the Forest Grove community, you know, there were a lot of things we grappled with and struggled with in this process. I don't know if that's what you were going to touch on, but there were a lot of things that required us to put in time and energy to think about every single day that we were doing this work.
And I would say that we definitely tried our best to acknowledge into certain spaces, if we were a person of color doing this, moving forward with this project, it would look completely different. And some of our privileges were shown through this project. I think about some of the days where like I wore a mask and met with some of the park directors here at this park, and Seema had a meeting and couldn't go. And like it was two white men. And how would have that been different? Or what obstacles would I have faced if I was a Black female?
Yeah, and just to jump in, you know, I can't say for sure, but you know, as a female and as a young female, and I'm sure that there are some listening right now, you can always pick up on when someone is addressing you differently because of that. And you know, there was a lot of that. We were referred to as kids or the girls, or like there was, you know, a tone in the way that we were approached that definitely made the process difficult. And if we were, you know, Black women, that would be different. And we can't speak to those experiences, but we know that it would be wildly different. And so just, you know, to add on to that, there was one moment when one individual, Amy Tracewell, who's been an amazing helper in this entire project, you know, she came up to us when we were painting one day, and she said, you know, she's been receiving like all these emails, and she's been handling like, there was a lot of like lash lashing out on the mural project on like Facebook and Nextdoor community posts. And she said that the stress she felt, and because she was trying to mitigate the issue and respond to people, was so immense to like be able to have to respond to like the racism and bigotry. And but then, you know, she took a step back and she said this can't even be an ounce of what it feels like to be a person of color in this country having to deal with that, because that becomes an everyday part of your existence. And so that was really, you know, really struck a chord with both Carson and I, that these things and the struggle that we're facing isn't even close to what it feels like to be, you know, struggling.
Yeah. So with that said, maybe I'll resume the video in a second and we can kind of go into more of a direction of hope in terms of how other people can maybe do similar projects, but also learn from what mistakes we might have made, as well as like maybe some funny moments we experienced during this process. And also just like hopeful moments, I will say in the beginning, not beginning, in the middle. Because this process did take so long, I thought I was gonna quit. I know I went up to Seema a couple times and I was like, Seema, I don't know if I can continue to this. I have a mentor and I talked to them about it, and they are totally on like follow through, and they didn't push me to make any decision, but just told me how like, you know, it might feel really good when you're done that you did take that commitment. And I'm so grateful that I worked on it with you, Seema, because it definitely like we helped each other stay committed and stay motivated, because we wanted to see our goals here be shown. It just like there's so much overlaying pressure to like stop us from actually accomplishing those goals. And so I want to say thank you for sure.
Thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. And seriously, I mean, and this is a great segue into talking about like perseverance through, you know, the barriers that we faced. But there were definitely times where we both at the same night, I looked at Carson, she looked at me, and we said, we can't do this. I think it was the second or third city council meeting where they were like deciding whether or not to make the edits or to pass the edits that were made. And we looked at each other and we were like, if it doesn't get passed this time around, I don't care about all the work we've done. I can't keep doing it. Like it was that exhausting and draining. And I'm glad that we both pushed each other and that we couldn't imagine not possibly following it through. But that doubt and that exhaustion is, I feel like, completely normal and a part of activism and these movements and processes, that you're gonna be drained. You're gonna need to take some self-care moments and take care of what you need to, because it's exhausting to do.
That's the only way we're going to see positive change. Like if we can't change our minds to do those, if we can't change our minds to act, then nothing, you know, our species is gonna be extinct tomorrow if we keep doing shit like that.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I think it's really important for, you know, every single individual to kind of think about like, what are they doing? What can they do? To think deeper about, you know, even like I mentioned in the beginning, like your relationship to land, and start those conversations with different communities. I mean, in all the work you do, there are ways to improve and grow together, which is why I love that part of the mural. I had conversations with the Confederated Tribe of Grand Ronde to talk about what a written land acknowledgement on a wall looks like to them. And I've done a lot of verbal land acknowledgements and kind of studied those, but still keeping that conversation going, you know, so important, such an important part of the growth.
And I think something that helped that encouragement and hope for us to continue was one day Seema and I were in Ace Hardware in Forest Grove, and so we had to buy primer and like all this paint for this mural, and you know, we created a budget and whatnot. So we walk in there and we're like, I had just paid $250 for them to power the mural. Seema was like, okay, I'll pay out of my account right now so I can pay for this because you just paid for that. And I was like, okay. So we're like figuring this out and like, holy shit, what are we gonna do? We're broke college students. And miraculously, this beautiful woman comes up and she was like, you know, we're gonna pay for everything. Wait, Seema pinched me. What the fuck did you just say? And like this woman literally just told us that like everything is gonna be free, all of our paint, and which was awesome because showed some beauty in people and how like people do want to help. It's clear that people with similar ideals want to help your ideas be created and manifested in the right direction. So I think that was something that was like really cool is, you know, donations, but you also need to put in the work to get grants. And it might be a headache at first, but getting those grants kind of helps ignite the thought, the physical thought, you know what, this can be done. This is possible. I can do this.
Right. Yeah. And so there was a lot of good that came our way. We were, you know, that moment still sits with me. I was literally like, okay, like how much money do I need to transfer from my savings to be able to pay for this? Like there was just so much good. Although, you know, 219 emails minimum was maybe one of the negatives, but there was a lot of good and people. I mean, Ramona and Stephanie just being some of them, and Ramona really kept us going. She's incredible.
Yeah.
But, you know, there were an amazing amount of people that came out to support us, even in the community. I met some people who really appreciate, people who gave us supplies, you know, Monica,
Shout out Monica.
You know, so
and also
so there was a lot of good.
Yeah, all the beautiful conversations that we had within the community while painting was awesome. Was so soul reviving to know that one day Seema and I were painting with a group of people, and this drunk dude just like starts yelling, and he's like, "Are you guys painting over the flag?" And it was like pretty clear like we were painting over the flag, and he wasn't wearing shoes, so I assumed he was drunk. And Seema and Charlotte kind of get closer to him to calm him down, but like maybe Seema can attest to this, but like this man almost freaking punched another dude.
It was, I mean, there were some scary moments out there. Like there was always the good and the bad, but there were some people who would come up to us and they wouldn't even be interested in hearing what we had to say or having a conversation, or they would be like this man that Carson's referring to. Like he just wanted to yell at me. And so I approach everything with, I just want to understand where everybody is coming from. So I said, can I know why that makes you upset? Like, I want to talk about, he goes like, well, I pay taxes here. Like, this is my town. I have a right for this to be here. And I was like, I pay taxes too. I've lived here, not on campus, like off campus for 2 years now. And I'm not, you know, like I'm a part of this community too. And just trying to empathize with this man and have him empathize with me. And there was none of that. And then, you know, he tried to punch another person walking by who told him like, hey man, can you like back off a little? Like, please don't bother them. And he literally was about to swing. Like it was scary. And there's just this level of intimidation as, you know, to be honest, being two women doing this work did influence how we felt. There were times where, you know, we had to go out there with a projector at night so that we could see the outline of the design. That was one of the easier ways to outline it. It is scary being two women in the dark. There was only ever one time we went out there alone, which we learned from because of how scared we were. But just, you have to go by different precautions. You can't go out there by yourself, especially when people are going to be angry at you. You have to, you know, work around that. And you know, luckily the police in Forest Grove were on our side. At least, I mean, they were on our side in terms of they had to do their job and protect the community. So they were there to make sure nothing like bad happened.
Also mentioned some good experiences we had where there was this one day, this one man who told us he was a Trump supporter, and he goes, of course he's not wearing a mask, sorry, just to throw that out there. He's like from afar, and he goes, you know, in the beginning I really didn't agree with this. And like it's silent for a minute. We're like, okay, cool. And then he goes, but you know, over time and seeing how you two girls prevailed, it's really awesome, and you guys are doing good work. That like energy from this man just like bombarded my heart. Goodness, I love that interaction. That would like made the project so worth it, knowing that, you know, there is some hope for minds to be combined, or like I love this reference where like one side and the other side can just slowly meet in the middle of that bridge and like have a conversation.
Yeah, there was a lot of good conversation that happened with people who had completely different perspectives, which was great to see. And And that last screenshot was just people who emailed us showing that they, this mural really has impacted and changed them in the conversations they've had, and being really incredible and supporting us. And here's a picture of us, at the park.
Yeah, the other side of it. Unfortunately, like the mural still isn't finished because Seema and I ran into like a COVID scare. None of us got COVID, but we wanted to keep our community and people safe, and we also wanted to go home to see our families. So we are still kind of battling some outside community members, but overall, this whole project has really opened my eyes to what community engagement looks like and how I really like it. Like if I'm going to be living in a community, I want to know what my community members are thinking and doing, and help them when they need help, and hopefully they'll help me when I need help, and hopefully it's not performative and it's progressive, so we can all live on this land and beautifully flourish into amazing little jewels of light.
Yeah, same. I think it's been an incredible learning process, and I think it was a learning process for a lot of people who supported us as well. And I just really want to encourage people who are listening to this that all these challenges I think are normal when you're learning as you go, especially in terms of like activism and trying to create social change. And just the smallest of conversations can spark those things. And so just encouraging you all to think deeper about ways you can create change. And maybe it's not so obvious as signing a petition or going to protests, which maybe you don't have the capacity to go to a protest. But things like, if you make art, you can, or you sell art, or you sell anything, you can donate proceeds to certain organizations, or you can do art that supports these people, or make sure that you're shopping from, Black or BIPOC, BIPOC communities in whatever way that you're shopping. And so, there's so many little ways to bring activism into your life. And I think activism doesn't have to be going to a protest. It just has to be doing something differently in a way that you're passionate about and trying to create change. So I really want to encourage all people to try and bring a little of that into your life. It doesn't have to be a lot, just a little.
Knowing that it's going to continuously change too, like maybe what we learned 2 years ago may not be appropriate in a year. Maybe it's different. That's because we're continuously evolving and figuring out what those emotions that people are feeling now might be, and how we can change it to make it feel better. Within this project, Seema and I are both applied sustainability majors, and knowing that like we have this deep connection and passion for caring for this environment, the only way that an environment can be sustainable is if it's socially sustainable too. And that kind of speaks to our project of, this is the first step in having people care about the land that they're living on and what they're doing to that land, or the products that they're buying, and how that has so many systematically different factors tying into the future of what our world looks like. But you have to have the people who are in this community feeling safe and comfortable and operating efficiently and ascending together. Otherwise, it's not going to be sustainable.
Right. And I think that that's something that, we will say a lot, environmental justice, racial justice and social justice are inseparable from environmental justice. You cannot separate the two. They are intertwined, and in the work you do, you will always find connections, that everything is interconnected. And so it's really important to bring a part of that into the work that we do and
100%.
understand that.